guys, Mike here with Delta. Now today I'm going to show you how to install a rough valve for a tub shower. In general, if you're tackling this project, you're doing a bathroom remodel that's being taken all the way down to the studs. If you're doing that complicated of a project, I'm guessing you already have some DIY experience. However, if after watching this video you feel like you're out of your depth, then we recommend calling a professional. Now first, let's look at the rough valve that we'll be installing today. This is a great offering from Delta that really opens the door to future changes to the look of your tub and shower without having to get back behind the wall. But this MultiChoice universal rough valve allows for compatibility with almost all Delta Faucet company tub and shower products. So it's worth looking for this specific rough valve to save some time down the road. Now, some lingo. Let's talk about what each of these components are to ensure we're speaking the same language here. Now this entire piece is called the rough valve. There are a few things I'd like to point out on this. First, the plaster guard. This actually detaches without any tools if you need to do some soldering. The plaster guard is a handy reference to determine the depth of the valve in the wall. We're going to get to that later. The other part are these 4 connections on the back, where you have one each for your hot and your cold coming in from the side, and then also outlets going up and down to distribute the water to your shower head and tub spout. The next piece here is the test cap, which is held on by this bonnet nut. The test cap is included with the rough and allows you to pressure test your plumbing prior to having the trim installed. Okay, now a quick note, some people may call this a diverter, but technically it's not. A diverter alters the direction of the flow of water. Now think of this like either to your tub spout or your shower head or a hand shower. I'm calling this a rough valve, and its purpose is to control the volume and temperature of the water. Okay, so now that we're on the same page about terminology, let's talk about installing it. Today we're installing an R10000-UNWS. That's a universal multi-choice valve with supply stops. It's worth checking your model number here. As long as you're installing a version of Delta's R10000 rough valve, the steps are generally the same. You may just need some different tools or supplies. For our installation today, you'll need a screwdriver, screws, and we recommend 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch screws to ensure you don't go through the wall, an adjustable wrench, a tape measure, a pencil, some safety goggles, a 4 or 6 foot level, copper or galvanized iron pipe for the tub drop plus a 90-degree elbow, and then whatever plumbing is appropriate for your water supply and pipe straps to anchor those pipes to the wall. And for pressure testing your rough valve, you'll also need the appropriate caps for your tub and shower fittings. Finally, if you're planning to sweat your own copper lines, then you'll need the appropriate tools to do that too, although that's not something we're going to show today. All right, we've got everything together, so let's get to it. Now before we begin, and if your tub is already in place, we're going to be working directly over it and standing in it, so we want to make sure that we're protecting the bottom. Here my packaging came with a cutout that protects the bottom. However, if yours didn't, go ahead and cut something out that fits and then place it in the bottom. Now the first step in our installation is going to be to determine where our tub spout, our rough valve, and our shower head are going to be located on our wall. Now in this case, the critical measurement is between 8 and 18 inches. We want to make sure that the rough valve is within that distance of the tub spout. If you're outside of those dimensions, the performance could be affected, so we always like to make sure it's in that optimal range. Now the first thing we want to determine is where our tub spout is going to be sitting. In my case, I already have my tub installed, which makes it easier because I can measure off the deck of the tub. However, if you haven't chosen a tub yet, or you don't have it delivered and you're not ready to install it, make sure you check out the spec sheet to make sure you know exactly how high that tub will be sitting. Okay, so the first measurement I want to make is to determine where my tub spout is going to sit. A good rule of thumb I find is right about 4 inches from the top of my tub deck is where I want my tub spout to be roughed in. So again, I'm taking my measuring tape, making sure it's tight to the top of my tub, and then I'm going to make a little mark right about 4 inches. Okay, great. Now from this mark, again, that optimal range is 8 to 18 inches where I want my rough valve to be. So I'm going to go ahead and measure up from that mark I just made. I'll make a little mark at between 8 and 18 inches. All right, so now that we have our tub spout and rough valve dimensions marked out, our next thing is going to be to determine where we want our shower head. Shower heads are generally located between 78 and 84 inches off of the floor. And there's a couple considerations you want to think through. The first is if you're going to be installing a wall set around your tub, like I am. One thing I don't want to do is actually have to drill through the side of my wall set for that shower, so I want to make sure I'm locating the rough-in above where that wall set's going to sit. For me, my walls of my wall set are 60 inches high off the top of the tub, so I'm going to make a quick measurement off my tub deck to 60 inches and just put a little line there. Okay, perfect. Now the next thing you want to think through also is what your shower head's going to look like. Now remember, wherever your rough-in is, when the shower head comes out of the wall, it usually has that little supply bar that has an angle to it, and then shower heads can be different depths and dimensions. So if you have the shower head on hand and you know what you're gonna use, I think it's a great idea. Just go ahead and dry fit that together and hold it up in place to make sure it feels right to you. For me, I've already done that, and I know 82 inches off my floor feels about right. So I'm gonna take my measurement. Again, making sure my tape is sitting on the floor. Stretching it up at the wall, right at 82 inches. Okay, great. Now that we've got those laid out, the last thing we need to determine is where our rough valve is going to be located. Now, remember we have this 10-inch leeway between 8 and 18 inches that we marked out earlier, and this one's really more based on feel. So one thing I like to do is always hold the rough valve in my hand, and this is where your handle is going to be located. So just try to think through what feels right to you for when you're going to be standing in the shower. I think right there feels pretty good for me. So once you have that in place, just make a little mark right at the center line of that rough valve, and then we'll be ready to move on. Now we have a lot of lines here, so if you get confused, make sure you put a little X through or delete the ones you don't need, because we're gonna focus on the tub spout, the rough valve, and the shower head marks. All right, now that we have the heights marked for our tub spout, our rough valve, and our shower head, the next step is to install our stringer boards. Now, stringer boards are just those horizontal pieces of wood mounted between studs that are gonna give us a surface to screw our rough valve and shower head into. Now, I'm gonna throw a little bit of math at you here because our rough valve needs to be mounted at 2 3/4 inches from the front of the finished wall. That basically will ensure that the edge of the plaster guard will sit flush with your finished wall. So what you have to do is think through the materials you're gonna be adding to your rough opening here. Now in my case, I'm gonna be adding a wall set directly to my stud, which is gonna add a 1/4 inch of distance. However, if you're tiling yours, you might be adding some cement board, plus some tile, plus some thin set, all of which are gonna make your finished wall depth deeper. So follow along with me here. Right now my wall to the stud is 3.5 inches deep. I'm gonna be adding again that 1/4 inch from my wall set mounted directly to the stud. Remember, I need to mount this at 2 3/4 inches, so 3 3/4 minus 2 3/4 equals 1 inch. And that's where my stringer board needs to be mounted off the back of my rough wall. All right, I've got a little mark there. I'm gonna go ahead and get those mounted, and they'll be ready to move on. Okay, great. Now I have a nice straight plumb line drawn across all 3 of my stringers here that's exactly centered over my drain in my tub. Now, one thing I do want to point out too is you may have noticed that my stringer for my shower head and for my tub spout was actually made out of some scrap 2x4s I had laying around the job site. The depth on these isn't as important as it is for the rough valve, just because with the fittings that you're going to be using to connect everything, you have a lot more leeway in there. So, I've got my lines drawn, now we're ready to move on. Now it's time to install our rough valve. Now the most important thing about this is making sure we install it with the right side up in the correct orientation. And there's 3 spots on the valve that will show you which way it goes. First on the back with little arrows that say up, pointing up. Second, inside your plaster guard here. And then also on the top of the valve itself, one side says up. So, the thing I find that's easiest to do first is pop off this plaster guard. It's got these little black clips in the back. Go ahead and pull this to the side. All right, perfect. Now that I've got the valve in hand, again, I'm making sure that I have up facing towards my shower head. I'm gonna place it on my stringer board. And what I'm looking for here is making sure that my outlets to my shower head and tub spout are lined up directly with that plumb line I just drew. And then from side to side, I wanna make sure my supplies are lined up with the horizontal line I previously drew. That looks pretty good, and I find it's easiest to take my pencil and just make a little mark inside these 2 screw holes. There's one kind of to the lower right and one to the top left. Okay, now it's time to mount it with those screws. Okay, that's looking great. Now I'm gonna go ahead and connect all my pipes. We're not gonna show you how to do that in this video, but I'm gonna go ahead and get that all done, and we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, I've got all my pipes put together, and I've got caps on my tub spout and my shower head. So all I have to do now is reassemble my rough valve and we're ready to pressure test. We're going to replace our test cap, which is included with every rough valve. Push that into place, followed by my bonnet nut. Slips right over the top of the cap, screws right onto the body. And this is fine being hand tight, we just want to make sure it's being held in place nice and snug. All right, great, now that about wraps it up. I've got everything connected and ready to be pressure tested. So I'll run some water through the system, make sure I don't see any drips anywhere. Last thing I like to do is put back on my plaster guards. All right, that just snaps right into place. Now, I always like reinstalling the plaster guard because I think it's a great idea for your other trades because it lets everybody know exactly the dimension that they need to go up to and not covering any of these important components of the valve itself. All right, that about wraps up a rough valve install. We hope you found this video super helpful. Be sure to check out our other videos. We walk you through how to install a wall set and also your shower trim. And as always, if you have any additional questions, be sure to reach out to Delta's customer service. They're always more than happy to help.